Hi, everyone who's joining us now. Just gonna let some people come in and then we'll get the show on the road. All right. All right. I think we can get things started now. Really excited to be here and introduce this amazing panel. My name is Matt. I am one of the co-founders of Documented. Just here to introduce our host and panelists. Before that, I just want to give you a little bit of background on my organization, Documented, who's sponsoring this event. We're a nonprofit news organization based in New York, and we cover New York City's immigrants and the policies that affect their lives. We're really committed to making sure that the people most affected by immigration news coverage are at the center of our stories and are dictating our coverage and really helping guide everything that we do. And Amir's a reporter that we've worked with extensively, who's done incredible work on this issue. Um, Documented is open, free to the public. Go on our website, documentedny.com, and you can read our stories. You can read Amir's incredible coverage from over the past year or so. And we also try and run our news organization with the support of our readers. So we have a membership program called the Documented Community. You can find out more about it. I think there'll be a link in the chat as well, so you can find out more about it, where we ask people to donate monthly to help support our work and help support programming like this. Part of that is we do a monthly event series exploring all the different issues that we cover on our website, as well as important things that we think are happening that affect immigrants or immigration policy in the city and nearby. So with that, I want to pass over the mic to Amir. I'm a big fan of Amir's. This is actually the first time I'm seeing you in real life. Well, not in real life, we're just seeing you virtually. Done incredible coverage for us about immigrant labor and all the different ways in which this pandemic has impacted immigrants working in lots of different sectors. So I'm just so excited for this panel, and I'll let you take it from here, Amir.
Thank you so much. That was a nice introduction. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Hello, panelists. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. Before I introduce our panelists, I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about what I have observed over the course of this pandemic in terms of reporting. I found one of the most underreported stories during this pandemic, and I see now that it's just getting some more attention as it deserves, is the labor aspect, right? We've seen a large scale labor organizing. We've seen a strike wave. We've seen unions increase in terms of public perception of support for unions increase. We've seen unionization drives like what we're seeing now with the Amazon workers. We saw the tremendous and victorious strike that we've had in Hunts Point in the Bronx. Workers across the country, immigrant and non-immigrant alike, have risen up and have decided that they were going to. I find it very interesting is because everyone's talking about returning to the new normal, but these workers are saying, well, we're going to dictate what the new normal really is going to look like, right? We're not going to go back to the normal that existed prior, because many of these workers that are organizing are in traditionally and criminally low wage industries in which they didn't make any money. They had very little to no health care. And now we're seeing them rise up and say, we're not going back to that. We're going to move ahead and we're going to organize. We're going to fight for our rights. We're going to fight for dignity. I've seen workers in the healthcare industry. I've seen workers in the home care industry, workers in the food supply industry, workers in the construction industry, laundry industry, you name it. All these jobs that were traditionally seen as unimportant has now become considered essential. You know, these workers in their lives have been seen as essential as the pandemic and its related economic collapse has spread across the country. We've seen workers, we've seen a new appreciation for what these workers do, right? We've often found that these workers were not really respected by their bosses, by the general public, and now we realize that we need them. It kind of erased uh, these arbitrary lines that were there in terms of what was really important in terms of stockbrokers or accountants or all these high industry jobs. Well, they weren't. They were going home. Those jobs disappeared. But yet, the truly essential farm jobs like farm workers, like home care workers, we needed them, and these workers are realizing it across all the different industries, and they're I don't want to repeat myself, but they're really rising up, and that's something that I've been privileged to be able to be on the front lines and covering a lot of the stories of these workers. And to segueing to our panelists, who represent many of these different industries and represent many of these workers that are actually on the streets continuing to fight, because not only the work is essential, but the struggle is essential. So without further ado, let me introduce our four amazing panelists. I'll start with Nelson Marr. He's been involved in the Chinatown and Lower East Side community since 1994, initially as a volunteer with the Chinese Staff and Workers Association. Nelson helped found the National Mobilization Against Sweatshops and the Peter Kwong Immigrant Workers Learning Center. In 2003, Nelson was elected as president of the 318 Restaurant Workers Union, an independent union serving the needs of mainly immigrant Chinese restaurant workers in the tri-state area. Yolanda Zhang is an organizer of the Ain't I a Woman campaign, Youth Against Sweatshops, and a key volunteer at the Flushing Workers Center. She is a graduate student pursuing a degree in journalism. She leads the COVID-19 relief program by distributing PPE to home care workers throughout the pandemic. She mainly works with Flushing Chinese-speaking home care workers who are organizing against wage theft and other sweatshop conditions. And finally, Rosanna Rodriguez is an immigrant from the Dominican Republic and the mother of 2 children. She's the founder, organizer, and key activist in the Laundry Workers Center, Workplace Justice Programs, Leadership Institute, and Women's Committee. Before becoming co-chair of the Laundry Workers Center, she was a treasurer and presently leads the administrative functions and educational programming. So let's start with you, Rosanna. As I know, but I'm sure many of our people listening right now are not aware, the workers at Wash Supply have been arbitrarily fired for organizing an independent union. I know throughout the pandemic, you've been organizing laundry workers. So if we can start, you could tell us a little bit about that campaign, the history of what the Laundry Worker Center has been doing, and why the work you have been doing is even more essential now than prior to the pandemic.
Thank you, Amir. Good afternoon, everybody. As Amir mentioned, my name is Rosanna Rodriguez, and I'm the co-executive director of the Laundry Workers Center. We are a non-for-profit organization that advocates for low-wage immigrant workers in New York City and New Jersey. And we mainly work with retail laundromat workers, food service industry, and also warehouse workers. All these industries were essential during the pandemic. And for us, our mission is to improve the living and working condition of the workers through the organizing process. We are a very grassroots member-led organization. I want to talk a little bit about COVID and how COVID is affecting our community, and then I want to talk about this specific case with the retail laundromat workers with Wash Supply. So I just want to say, talking about COVID, that as you mentioned, many research and data demonstrate that people of color have the higher rates of underlying medical conditions that increase the likelihood that they will become infected with COVID-19. The higher level of poor health among minorities shaped by a number of, social, environment, and economic factors. And we know that one of the factors is like the discrimination, systemic discrimination, the inequality on income, and the flexibility that people cannot work from home, that many of our people in our community work from essential industries and are essential workers, and also the fact that they don't have access to healthcare, for example. And transition to that, talking about essential workers, I want to speak about laundromat workers that during the pandemic make a huge role, because they were the ones that were cleaning our laundries when we stay home. In the retail laundromat workers, we found out in New York City, just in New York City, we have more than 4,000 laundromats. The workforce, the majority of the workforce are women of color, immigrants. And before the pandemic, the conditions of laundromat workers were very precarious. Like we, in 2018, we launched a report about the condition of the workers, and we find that, the workers were underpaid. Most of them were not paid even the minimum wage. They have to work long hours. They were in the industry, working in the industry for many years, many bad health and safety conditions, harassment, not just by the employer, but also by customers. So during the pandemic, those conditions get worse. The most of our members, and what we found out is that many of the laundromat workers were infected or have the symptom of COVID-19, because most of them, the employer do not provide the adequate protections or don't follow any protocols. Also, they have to deal with angry customers that don't want to wear a mask or keep social distance. And some of them lost their jobs because when they get infected, because the employer do not provide the PPE, when they recover and go back to work, the employer do not want to return their jobs. I want to talk about this specific case with wash supply Leo cleaners chain. The workers approached to the laundry worker center before the pandemic started, and talking about that they want to change the condition inside the workplace. They learn about their right through our Leadership Institute, and then on November last year, during the pandemic, they decide to launch a public campaign against this company because they want to improve the condition over there. Also, they want to recover the stolen wages. And October, with community members, they approach the management and bring a demand letter with all the things that they want to make changes inside the workplace, but also with the demand for wage theft. And also, the workers decide to form an independent union. After that, the company started taking a lot of retaliation against the workers, and also hire a consultant, anti-union, union busting consultant to prevent workers to form their independent union. But that the workers were determined to have a union and have better conditions in the workplace. So in January, at the end of January, they have an election. The workers won the union, And after that, the National Relation Board certified the independent union. But what happened was the employer, after that decision came, decide to close down the laundromat to avoid responsibility and to not provide good conditions to the workers. And they took all the machine out, they fired the workers, and they do not negotiate the closing with the union, which is illegal. So now, workers continue organizing, workers continue taking actions. This company belong to a chain called Leo's Cleaner. Leo's Cleaner continue operating. And what workers are demanding is that Leo's Cleaner rehire the workers and recognize the union. There's an ongoing investigation with the National Relation Board. But, all these things can, we see in the pandemic was an eyes open for many workers that realized the employers, many bad actors, they just care about their profit and not by the human being. So for us as an organizer, we saw that there's a lot of opportunity because right now people feel like they have nothing to lose, that they must fight back for essential things that they, as workers, they should have. So we are fighting for many good things. And for example, there was many ways to prevent that this employer run away when they stole the wages from workers. For example, we are part of the Sweat Coalition, and I'm sure like Yolanda is going to speak more about that. We hope that legislators took into account that, because like this can prevent that when this law, if it's passed, can help workers to, that they can recover the stolen wage and prevent that the employer run away and do not pay the workers. And also something that we are fighting during this pandemic is like with the coalition, the New York Heroes Act, because it's key that we have, we have standards that protect the workers in terms of health and safety, not just guidelines. But with the New York Heroes Act, if this become a law, we can use this as a tool so workers can, have standards that can protect them in terms of health and safety, not just for COVID, but for any infection disease that appear in the future if that happens. And the other one is many of our workers, especially laundromat workers that are immigrants, they were excluded from any economic aid. So we are fighting to make sure that New York create a fund for excluded workers, not just for immigrant or undocumented workers, but also for incarcerated workers, for sex workers that during the pandemic, they were like, they were not receiving any support in that sense. And the other thing at the federal level that we hope is gonna be a huge tool if that happens is the PRO Act. This act will make possible for workers to file a lawsuit against company who illegally fired them, give worker compensation if they are illegal fired, or if the employer used any anti-union tactics, make much more difficult for employer to fire the workers. So yeah, that's what I have to say and share for all the experience that we are having So we are taking action against Leox Cleaner to make sure workers are rehired and that they recognize this independent union. And we continue fighting for better conditions for all workers in New York State.
Thank you so much, Rosanna. I really appreciate it. That was really great. Just a brief reminder to our attendees, please, any questions you have, please put it in the chat and we'll do our best to get back to everybody. So moving on that, and I think you brought up so many great points, Rosanna. Yolanda, when we talk about excluded workers, right? When we talk about immigrant workers being exploited, what have you seen so far in the home care industry, and what kind of abuses and issues these workers have been facing prior to the pandemic, but how has those issues magnified during the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Amir, for the question, and thanks, Rosanna, for the presentation. Yes, I can, I'll mainly talk about three things, right? Like you said, Amir, like the nature of home care work, how it was like before the pandemic. Like we said, we don't want to go back to pre-pandemic because it was already really bad, and how, you know, it got worse, you know, in the pandemic. And then what is, you know, the home care workers' demand that I think, you know, will, you know, be able to unite not just immigrant workers in home care, but also all immigrant workers, and, you know, on top of that, the citizen workers as well. So like Rosanna's saying about the laundry workers, right? The demographics of home care aides in New York State is also disproportionately immigrant and immigrant women, right? I mean, I wonder why. Like I'm asking, like, I want to know why, right? So, you know, to like basically, I want to expose a little bit of the racism and sexism involved, you know, that I see, you know, when we organized, you know, home care workers in Flushing Worker Center, especially when, you know, home care workers are on the managed long-term care, you know, which is like largely assaulted by Governor Cuomo's Medicaid redesign, right? So like, let's remember that the media coverage of Cuomo's abuse of women has always left out us immigrant women workers. You know, this is undeniably like racism and sexism. And I'll also say for, you know, those of you who are not like familiar with home care workers, you know, many of them work 24 hours a day and for days on end, right? There are 300,000 of home care workers, you know, mostly immigrant women, you know, with an average age of 45 to 50 years old. Like they take care of, you know, predominantly elderly people receiving care, but they themselves are also like kind of elderlies, right? So there's also ageism involved, and they can't sleep at night, right? So many Medicaid eligible patients have severe illnesses so that they need to be cared for every other hour at night. And, you know, they need to be assisted to go to, you know, to take bathroom breaks, and, you know, they need to be turned, you know, on their beds to avoid bed sores. So the home attendants like developed high blood pressure, you know, chronic insomnia, you know, they can't even sleep in their own apartments, you know, in their own homes. And they'd be like waking up at night being like, oh my gosh, like, did someone just call my name? You know, like the condition's been really bad. And also, you know, again, there's this woman's care work that's been taken granted a lot of time, you know, some of them would kind of de facto cook for the entire household, right? Just because, you know, it's the societal like lack of recognition for women's work. And so I'll just read some quotes from home care workers who've been saying their testimonials. You know, when you're in patients' homes, you sleep with one eye open, one eye closed, right? You need to be alert. You always worry that something will happen to the patient, and you feel anxious. You know, you think like, how many more days should I still be doing this? Sleeping my own breath. When can I sleep in my own bed? You know, breathe the air outside and do what I like to do. You know, even study. Like, you know, and it's a lot of them saying, I couldn't even see my kids growing up. I have to have someone else take care of them, right? And there's this other home care, which is a leading kind of Chinese speaking home care worker who is saying, Mei Kum Chu, who's saying that there's only 24-hour work offered to us, right? Many workers after training refuse the 24-hour shift. But then that agency would just not give them any jobs and would give the 24-hour shift to the next person, saying that there's so many people wanting for jobs right now, right? So it wasn't really offered as a choice for the immigrant workers. It's either 24 really shitty hours or, not any, no jobs at all. So, home attendants kind of this is even before pandemic, they find themselves in the situation where they have to choose between like earning a barely livable wage versus having the time, and to take care of their health, their life, and spend time with families. So, this is not like a choice that is offered to workers. And during the pandemic, like Rosanna was saying that, wage theft increased. So many workers, home care workers included, have been fighting for this legislation SWEAT, which allows workers to freeze the employer's assets. And there will be an April 12th action to mobilize folks around SWEAT, and I'll circulate a link in the Zoom chat later. And for home care workers specifically, like Rosanna's also saying, they are exposed disproportionately to COVID, right? And they've died also disproportionately from COVID because of those, health complications that, accumulated from like years, right? Some worked 10 years, 20 years of like, 24-hour work days. And over the pandemic, we also seen that 24-hour shifts actually increased, right? Because many of the home care workers were asked to stay overtime in the patient's house to avoid unnecessary travels or public transportations, to like minimize exposure. And, a lot of them have like kind of taken on more shifts for co-workers who felt sick, right? And a lot of the agencies are trying to lay off more home cares, more unemployment, when we would do calls to home care workers, the next month we know, they're unemployed and asking for unemployment help, and with the unemployment they, also lost a lot of safety net, no health insurance. So you really see this uneven distribution of like jobs, on the one hand, you have home care workers who are toiling even more 24 hours, and even more jeopardizing their own health and life. On the other hand, you have unemployed home cares, who are like, who are really kind of there to serve as this reserved army of like labor, for agency to say like, okay, you're not happy with your job, well, don't worry, like someone else, will be happy to take your job. And then the most frustrating or the most like, absurd condition was the fact that despite Governor Cuomo issued this like executive order for employers to hand out mandatorily PPEs to protect workers, nothing virtually was given to home care workers. So we found out that there were over 50 home care agencies, and that's at least what we found. There are probably more out there, who did not provide enough PPEs to workers. And this is the moment when, workers were like, wait a minute, like it really shows that when it comes to the lives, and the well-being of workers as human, like Rosanna was saying, right? They don't really care about us. They can throw us crumbs to increase some of our wages, but still not pay us the entire, time that we work, and still like, dictate the way we spend our days, because those home cares are working for 24 hours a day, and that's as many hours as you have in a day, and then they experience more displacement too, right? I'm sure Nelson will go into it too, that displacement and, wage theft and, sweatshop condition, they're not separate social issues. And that's everything that, that workers experience under the pandemic. And so in the midst of this, right, we see immigrant workers actually, are firm in overturning their own fate. In Chinese, overturning your fate is the literal translation for revolution. So, they're saying like they need the control of time, right? Like Amir was saying, people are trying to figure out a new normal. The workers are leading the imagination for a new normal, right? The society has been telling all of them, look, you're powerless, feel thankful that you're in America and you have a job, feel thankful. They're saying no, so since 2015, Lai Yi, whom Amir has spoken to, Lai Yi Chen, led a group of CPC, so Chinese American Planning Council, this social service program, who led like this huge home care company, so Lai Yi Chen mobilized her coworkers to take action since 2015. So and throughout the years, they were able to Lai Yi at least was able to get 12-hour shift. So companies were scared of her, and she's made like enough noise, and was really setting a good precedent for workers to stand out. So in 2019, home care workers introduced a new legislation in New York State to demand an end of 24-hour workday, which does not mean that it's an end of 24-hour care, just that the 24-hour care will be carried out by two separate home cares in non-sequential 12-hour shifts, so non-sequential for the same worker. In actually coming up in April 28th, Lai Yi and other CPC workers will demand their back wages immediately. They've been waiting for 6 years now, from the legal process. They really demand it immediately. They demand an immediate end to 24 hours and really recognize, the labor of care work, right? So, we'll send out follow-up information too if people are interested, in supporting. And so we really see that immigrant workers, right? They're not asking the society to sympathize with, right? They say that, we don't, they're actually saying a lot that, home care workers saying that we don't want this to just be an advocacy within the home care industry. We want to, we need to revolutionize, our whole workaholic culture in America. The way that Americans normalize long hours, as long as 24 hours are paid, things will be fine. And otherwise, if we don't change the way that we think as a class, right, it's the condition won't improve for the home care workers either. So we really see that, like in our, for example, like last action, which is around International Women's Day, we see workers joining the home attendants, from construction, from day labor, from I think some laundry workers, a lot of restaurant workers, office workers, right, artists, even academics, who all perceive themselves as like suffering from this long hour regime, right, coming out and joining their fight. And we really seeing that immigrant workers are the agent of change, right, and they're leading this labor movement. And so yeah, and then that's and then I'll just add that lastly, I think also what I've learned, what also many of us have learned, that going back to what I started from, that racism and sexism are not just the matter of like an attitude held by any individual person, right? I mean, racism and xenophobia, as from according to home care workers' experience and many immigrant workers' experience, that they lie in the way that we see our class as divided, and the way in which we're put in competition to each other. That all of these are kind of conditioned in the setup of our industry. Like if home care workers are toiling 24 hours, then my boss, I'm a student, as a student worker, my boss can easily say that, be thankful, you're only working 16 hours. Look at those home care workers who are working for 20, you should be thankful. I actually was talking to, my, a friend from the NYU Student Union, they're like, NYU has been telling media, journalists, we, NYU, was proudly paying our graduate student 3 times as much as the federal minimum wage. It's really pitting the workers against each other. And, I'm really like, inspired by like home care workers who can actually stand out and say like, no, let's end this. Let's end the competition, and let's recognize that these are the conditions designed by, like I said earlier, by Governor Cuomo, by the state of New York, right? By a governor who oversees the entire home attendance situation and is able to turn a blind eye, right? And, like, if this is not racism, this is not sexism, I don't know what it is. And I just wanted to make a point about the anti-Asian violence too, to segue into Nelson's talk about Jing Fong. How, again, the violence is not an act committed by an individual person, right? It comes from sometimes the Asian Americans' own community too. When Lai Yi's employer, CPC, the Chinese American Planning Council, is one of the largest nonprofit for Asian Americans, right? They've been not willing to pay back a multi-million-dollar amounts of back wages to the workers, as 24-hour shifts are only paid for 13 hours of it, right? And most ridiculously, they gave out 10 masks made from thin layers of toilet papers in the start of the pandemic to their workers. It's really an insult, and how do we really systemically stop violence towards immigrants, right? I think we should, I'm really happy to have this discussion with everyone today. We should really come together and unite and see, who are our enemy and what kind of governance are we dealing, are we standing against? So thank you.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. I really appreciate that. You brought up so many good points. And for our attendants, if you have any questions, please feel free to add your questions to the chat and we'll do our best to get to them. I have a lot of questions myself, so I'm sure there's no shortage of questions. Nelson, thank you for attending this panel. Let's talk about some of the points that Yolanda brought up. Specifically, the media has been focusing on violence against Asians, and rightfully so. And there's just a recent attack, yesterday. But let's talk about the exploitation of Asian American workers and the displacement that's occurring in Asian American communities. And it seems to me that the fight at Jing Fong is part of that.
Yeah, that's right, Amir. And there's a lot of threads to connect here, and it's sort of, a lot to take on, but we're going to try. And first, let me just thank you, Amir and Documented, for inviting me to join this great panel and to talk about this important topic today. Maybe it might help if I first start by sharing the history of 318 Restaurant Workers Union, because I'm sure many of you may not be familiar with who we are. The 318 Restaurant Workers Union, much like the laundry union, the independent union that Rosanna talked about, is an independent workers union. It was formed in the early 80s in New York City's Chinatown, when there was actually a huge movement by restaurant workers to fight for better working conditions. Initially, they sought out some of the traditional, more established unions to join, but after a number of bad experiences, including racial discrimination, those workers decided to form their own independent union. And as a result, almost 40 years to the day, on March 18th, 1981, the 318 Restaurant Workers Union was born. And over the years, we have mainly helped immigrant restaurant workers in Chinatown and throughout the tri-state area to organize and fight for better working conditions, and if it's possible, for a collective bargaining agreement. Some of you may know some of our victories at some of the big dim sum restaurants in Chinatown, like Silver Palace, and you're all probably very familiar with Jing Fong restaurant, which is the restaurant that was recently closed, that Documented was so kind to run a piece on, and it was in a lot of other media as well. Jing Fong restaurant, was the largest restaurant in Chinatown. Could seat up to 800 people. Its dining room stretched the full length of the city block. And it was the largest Chinese restaurant on the East Coast. We had over 70 union members. We were able to unionize the dining room staff after almost 20 years of bitter labor struggle at Jing Fong, which started in 1994, 1995. They not only recognized the union, but actually entered into a collective bargaining agreement. So between 2011 until its closure back on March 8th, Jing Fong was the only unionized restaurant in Chinatown. And the community and our union rose up and really challenged the closure of the restaurant and really pointing to how this closure didn't have to happen and that it was really forced by the landlord. And the landlord at 20 Elizabeth Street, where Jing Fong used to be, that property is owned by Alex Chu and his son, Jonathan Chu. It's important to know that the Chu family is the largest land owners in Chinatown. They own so many properties in Chinatown. You could arguably say they're the Trumps of Chinatown. It is our understanding that, because they wanted to take the lease back, that they wanted to, do something with the space there, that they effectively, constructively evicted the Jing Fong restaurant. And this is nothing new, right? Landlords and real estate developers, feel they can do whatever they want with their properties, even if it means, breaking a contract, breaking a lease, which is a contract. And this is essentially, what we believe has happened at Jing Fong. And our members, which is predominantly immigrant Chinese restaurant workers, some of them, who've been working in the community for over, 20 years, said, no, landlord has to be accountable to the community. This Jing Fong doesn't only represent some good union jobs, but in fact, it's more than that. It's a community center. It's the only place where you can hold large gatherings. Local family associations would hold their New Year celebrations at Jing Fong. So our members know that this issue is bigger than just simply one restaurant, that it is about, the forces of displacement that has been crushing Chinatown for many years now, and will only be accelerated if these landlords at Jing Fong, are able to get away with closing down Jing Fong. Because, as I mentioned, Jing Fong is the largest restaurant in Chinatown, and it would attract up to 10,000 customers each week. And that, before the pandemic, was, essentially the heart of the Chinatown economy. And if you rip that heart out now, what kind of recovery should we really expect? I think, 10,000 people walking around Chinatown on any given week, goes a long way towards a just and fair recovery for all the small businesses in Lower Manhattan. And we're not only, the union, but we've gotten community support to come out to say that, landlords and developers like Jonathan and Alex Chu, can't use the pandemic as a cover to displace working people from our communities. We know that the restaurant, was profitable before the pandemic, and we know that it would be profitable even after the pandemic. And in fact, we've been able to get, the workers were able to get some investors who came together, who actually offered to take over the lease at Jing Fong. So pretty much saying to the landlords, look, we can, take over the lease, we'll get your rent paid, and, you can make money, and, we can keep the workers working. And again, the landlords chose not to respond and essentially disregard the community. So, so our community is fighting back, and we are, looking to put pressure on both the landlords and, the local city government to hold, Alex Chu and Jonathan Chu accountable, that, their actions can will actually really hurt the community. And we see this as part of the bigger fight to stop displacement in Chinatown and the Lower East Side. And over the years, our union has been active in that fight. We're a proud member of the Chinatown Working Group, which is a coalition of organizations who've put forward a community rezoning plan that includes both Chinatown and the Lower East Side. This plan would, protect residents and small businesses from the upzoning that leads to displacement. And many of you would ask, well, why would a union be involved with fighting displacement? Well, our members know that with more high rises, more luxury developments, that only pushes working people out, and it makes it less affordable not only to rent and live there, but it also makes it less affordable for small businesses to stay in business and operate there. And a lot of those small businesses employ, local community members. So, so we're looking for help as this fight is ongoing. So I'll drop my my email in the chat if you're interested in joining our efforts. We're going to have upcoming protests and pickets and tabling. So we'd love to have your support.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yes, again, to any of our attendees, please feel free to send us some questions. We have a lot of great questions so far, and I'm going to start us off, but yes, please do it in the chat. Before I start any of the questions, can I, and you were kind enough to do that, Nelson, can you please put a way that if people would like to support the efforts of your organizing in any way, can you put it on the chat? And can you please tell us a little bit about that? I'm sure people would be eager to help out. So let me start off with you, Rosanna. I've just had an interesting thought, and I'll start the question and answer period here. You had mentioned to me that the battle at Wash Supply and the organizing effort was the first time a storefront laundry mat was organized as a union. It's at a union shop. So my question would be, what is the significance of that to the greater labor movement as a whole, and what would the victory mean for low-wage workers in industries that haven't necessarily been organized before?
Yes, as you mentioned, this was a huge victory, and the first retail laundromat organized an independent union in New York City. So it means that other workers can organize. It can set a precedent for other workers, immigrant women that are part of the workforce of the retail laundromat. That they can see that they can have better conditions in their workplaces. The idea of our organization is to transform their entire industry, and I see, this small laundromat that have the independent union can be huge for many workers that work in this industry.
Thank you so much. Let me start taking some of the questions we have. Let's start off with, let me look, I got so many good questions. Which one should I choose? Okay, so somebody asked, would an increase of the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour impact minimum wage workers in New York, where $15 is already the minimum wage? Anybody feel free to jump in on that question.
I can say a little bit, just very short, how I think the increase of minimum wage is good, but as workers, as a class, we really demand more, right? We want a demand that all of us, both those who are working under minimum wage, you realize that there are laws that are not enforced. We're talking about, like, for example, home attendants who only get paid half of the time they work for during 24 hours, during the day, 24 hours, the raise in minimum wage don't benefit them because they're still technically receiving half of whatever minimum wage is. So really think that let's expand our imagination. The home care workers are leading the fight for control around time. And Jing Fong workers and, laundry workers are, fighting to have a say on, how the workers have the union or, to control, to secure their jobs, and lead the fight of the community so as that nobody gets displaced.
Let's stay with you for a second, Yolanda, and then this is also open for any of the other panelists. You mentioned Como a lot in your talk. What can we do as organizers around Como in terms of the impasses that he puts in organizing?
Yes, we need to remember, I think, that's also what I learned a lot from, organizing with the workers, and in a way, workers organize me, that the power doesn't really come from, whatever Cuomo say, right? We realize that, we expose, his system so underregulated, so privatized, the Medicaid redesign. We expose that and we hold him accountable. And we, also say, like I said, that, his abuse of women really transcends, sexual harassment and scandals. It's a whole system. And so I think that as organizers, we should actively join the home care workers. And I know that, Jing Fong workers are also holding the city accountable. We should join the workers lead and in our own capacity, write op-eds, article, or, create social media content to tell people that, all of this is happening under whose watch, right? These are our elected officials. Where do the powers come from? It comes from, us, but it is also up to us, to utilize that power. Amir, you're muted.
Thank you very much. Would anybody like to add to that? Any other panelists?
Well, I can say, the experience with Cuomo is that he is not in the side of the working class. Because all the things that for example, last year he vetoed the SWET bill that will prevent employers to steal the money from workers. Mention for example, having 15 per hour is great, but like Yolanda mentioned, if we don't have a mechanism to prevent employers to steal the wages, still paying below the minimum wage, it's not worth it. So when we are talking about excluded workers, New York is run, the economy is run by immigrant workers. He closed the eyes and exclude the workers. When we are talking about essential workers, what we are doing for essential workers? We are just putting the hand on the shoulders and say, like, you're essential, or how are we really gonna recognize the people that are in the first line? And we are, we recognize the people in the healthcare, but what about other workers that are like delivery workers? What about home care workers? What about laundry workers that work in the first line during this pandemic, continue risking their life?
Thank you. Nelson, I have a question specifically for you. The person who asked the question says, curious, Nelson, if the union and Jing Fong were aligned in the fight against the landlord, or has Jing Fong disbanded completely and decided to stay out of business?
Well, it's a very interesting question. So publicly, the owners of Jing Fong have tried to stay out of this controversy, and and to be honest with you, I can understand that coming from their point of view. They're in the business of operating a restaurant, and they're going to have to deal with landlords. And so if they're publicly bad-mouthing landlords, or trying to set the record straight against landlords, that could, negatively affect them, much like how we see that happening to renters, right? When renters speak out against bad landlords, I think we've heard about all these blacklists that exist out there. So they've made it very clear to us that they wanted to continue operating, and that they were being forced out by the landlord. And recently, I guess they've had enough of some of the lies that the landlord has put out. And actually, in a Daily News article over the weekend, they came out to say that the landlords were lying about them not paying rent during the period of COVID during this last year. So, because in a lot of the recent press, the landlords through their PR firm have been saying that the restaurant's closing because business has been bad and they couldn't even pay rent. And we've been really so kind to them, and we haven't evicted them or anything like that. So clearly that's not true. The landlords have received some form of rent, during that period of time, and the owners put that on the record. Jing Fong, they've decided they wanted to open somewhere else. That's fine. That's up to them. Our concern is to keep a restaurant functioning at 20 Elizabeth Street. To utilize that huge space, and keep it as a restaurant to serve, not only the interests of diners, but also just the greater community.
Thank you so much. So we're about to wrap up, and I wanted to thank everybody and all of our panelists for participating in this amazing panel. I've learned a lot. I hope a lot of the attendees learned a lot. I think it's important for us to be aware that essential workers are not passive. They're actually, and they're not, I feel like the media has this paternalistic attitude towards them. And it's like, oh, we're going to clap all, at 7 o'clock every day to help essential workers. But essential workers are fighting back, and they're really working to make sure that we come out of the pandemic. The working class people come out of the pandemic stronger and more organized than they were before. And I think that's something that all of the work that you all are doing exemplifies that. So thank you again to all of our panelists. I appreciate it. To all of our attendees, I appreciate the questions. It was truly amazing. If you want to support the work that Rosanna's doing, Yolanda's doing, and Nelson's doing, you can look at the chat. They posted links to how you can help out. You can donate if you want. You can continue being in solidarity with their work. I want to thank Documented for giving us this opportunity to have this platform. It's really we really appreciate that. And I'm going to pass it off to Mazen, please.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. Really, really amazing discussion. I learned a ton. And yeah, it's just it echoes some of the amazing work that Amir has been publishing over the past year, and the amazing organizing that's been happening across the city. Thank you to all of you for taking the time, and thank you to everyone who attended. Like, some of the questions were really incredible, and we really, really appreciate it. once again, if you didn't hear at the start, Documented is a non-profit news organization that covers New York City's immigrants and the policies that affect their lives. We're really dedicated to covering labor issues. You can find our work at documentedny.com. And if you want to see recordings of these events, you know, we have a monthly event series. Next month will be focused on Chinatown and what impacts the pandemic has had on Chinatown in the future, what the future might hold. So those events are open to the public, but if you want an archive of those events in a recording, join the Documented community. There's a link to that in the chat. It's a membership program where you can help support our journalism, keep our journalism free and open to the public, keep these kinds of events happening. And yeah, there's a few other benefits to joining as well. So I hope you look into that. Once again, thank you to the panelists and thank you everyone for coming through.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.